How can we make the world better? By making ourselves better. The Dr. Joe Show explores how you can make positive personal change by using his groundbreaking and highly effective I Am approach to understand who we are and why we do what we do. Your small changes can have big effects.
Join us now for the Dr. Joe Show with Mark Stiles of Stiles Law and your host, Dr. Joe Schrand.
Welcome to the Dr. Joe Show. How you doing? How you doing, Dr. Joe?
I'm doing well, Tom. How about you?
You know, it's not bad, Dr. Joe. I finally bit the bullet and got a new car. Not a new car,
Whoa.
but a fancy car by my standards. It is a 2012 Honda Civic.
Oh my gosh. Tom, you're living outside your means a little bit here, don't you think?
I think so. I'm gonna have to. I mean, I'm used to eating green beans. Stop and Shop brand green beans, no sodium. But shout out to Brianna Wu, past guest, who is a bit of a car aficionado. I asked her, hey, what's a good sedan style car in my price range that costs nothing to repair and can last forever? And hey, wanted me to Ally Motors in Whitman. There's my plug for the night.
Well, I mean, she's always been a vehicle for change, so that's great.
Oh,
Thank you. But speaking of vehicles for change in the real way, who has a voice that I hope more people will hear. Tom, could you please introduce our guest for tonight?
absolutely, Dr. Joe. Tonight we are welcoming back past guest Patrick Girondi, originally from the south side of Chicago. He's an Italian and American singer-songwriter, author, and founder of San Rocco Therapeutics, a gene therapy company focused on bringing a safe and accessible cure to sickle cell disease and thalassemia patients. Girondi has released 7 music albums, and Skyhorse published his Wall Street Journal #1 bestseller, Flight of the Rondone. Girondi's new book, New City, will be published by Skyhorse and distributed by Simon & Schuster on February 14th, 2023. Girondi is also the author of Diamond in the Rough. Welcome to the Dr. Joe Show.
Thank you.
Yeah, welcome back, Patrick. It's so good to have you here. So I'm just going to hold up the book, New City. A story about race baiting and hope on the south side of Chicago by Wall Street Journal best-selling author Patrick Girondi.
Thank you.
Tell me about the book. How did this book come about?
Well, so I'm doing a deal. Tony Lyons of Skyhorse is flying in. I'm in Tampa at the moment, where we have San Rocco headquartered. And Tony Lyons is flying in on February 15th, and the intention is to sign another 3-book deal. So when I see a situation in my past, I try to think of a way that I can solve it kind of without solving it. You know, when you go to people and you say, you're doing this the wrong way, it's not necessarily very efficient. But if you can entertain them and say the same thing basically with your entertainment, then you've got a hell of a lot better chance of winning them over. So New City is a very interesting book for me. I loved doing the background check of the Chicago stockyards. So the Chicago stockyards, which were around, I mean, there's still some small companies, but their heyday ended in the 80s. And, you know, it was 2 square miles of a butcher house, and incredibly interesting place to live. And next to the stockyards, they needed a place to put the workers. And that's what New City was. It was a place to put the, you know, for the most part, there were Slavs, a lot of Slavs. I mean, there was everything, of course, Italians, Irish, you name it was there. But there was also a lot of Polish and Ukrainian, Lithuanian in the area. And they were tough people, and it was an interesting area. And they started closing in the 70s. And of course, when all of the jobs left, the neighborhood turned from being mostly Slavic to being somewhat Hispanic, and then almost all Black. And I took the idea of writing this book from my friend Davey Polenic. So I lived in New City for about 1.5 or 2 years. And I shined shoes on 51st Street and 47th Street with Davey. Davey, he describes himself as just, you know, a Polak. He had 11 brothers and sisters. And I knew all of them, or at least, you know, to see them. And he ended up, after the neighborhood went black, he stuck it out, and he kind of became like a sage, and just an incredible person. And I use that.
But a sage in what way? How is Davey a sage?
Well, New City, I would say 10 to 15% of the homes don't have water. I would say that, oh gosh, 5% don't have any electricity. A lot of them don't have heat. Davey doesn't have heat. He has electricity, no water. But it's kind of a dismal place where there's poverty, all different kinds of poverty. For years and years and years, the biggest business was the drug deals and prostitution. And Davey stuck it out. And there's so many wonderful, decent people that came into New City looking for another chance. And Davey was like a magnet to them. So, you know, I would come over to his house and I would see that he had a line going from the telephone pole, you know, into his backyard, and then over to the neighbor's house. The neighbor, Napoleon, 5 kids, and Davey hijacked the electric wires so that Napoleon, you know, would have electricity for his kids, for his 5 kids. And Davey, I say in the book, he could fix everything from a broken pipe to a broken heart. He's just a great guy.
And you guys were childhood friends?
Yeah, me and Davey, we, like I said, were shoe shine pals. And I think there's something magic about the relationship between shoe shine buddies.
All right, I want to hear about that. What's magic about it, Patrick?
Well, when you're a shoe shine, like we were, you're 8, 9, 10 years old, and I did it all the way up till I was about 12. And you got to be very alert to watch that there's no people passing or no kids passing on the street. And that might be a sign that there's bullies up ahead. You go into bars, basically, and you have to remember the bar that you can go in at such and such a time, the bartender that throws you out, the bartender that gives you a bag of barbecue potato chips. You have to be very careful about eyeing up the people that you asked if you could shine their shoes. Obviously, some of these people are down and out for a lot of reasons. Obviously, you know, to go in on Friday afternoon when people get their paychecks. But we were robbed a couple times, me and Davey. And I'll never forget, one morning, 4 or 5 guys came up to us and they said, "Give us your money." And that wasn't really a problem. And we gave them our money. And then they said, "Give us your boxes." And I said, "Please, you know, this is how I make my living. I can't give you my box." And one of them made a mistake to reach for Davey's box, and boy, did he wallop him. And, you know, I think Davey's a lot tougher than I am and a lot stronger. And he was just going like a windmill. And of course, I gained the courage from watching him. And so then I just started, you know, but the 5 guys kind of ran away, and that was the last time we had any problems. But my sister Bernadette was making her communion, and my mother didn't have money for a communion dress. And so we were borrowing a communion dress from a Mexican family that went to the same St. Augustine school. And so that, you know, the Mexican girl would make her communion on May 10th, and then my sister would make it on May 17th. And I knew that there was no money to buy any kind of a gift, you know, for my mother, and who was a single parent. And so I told Davey in the morning, you know, this is what's going on. And we planned, and we started out in the morning at Laughlin. We usually started, and then we passed Ashland, and we did all the stores up to Damon. And then right after Damon on the north side of 51st Street, there was a jewelry store. And if I remember right, it was 51st Street Jewelry Store. And so we walked in there and I eyed everything. And the guy said, yeah, what can I do for you, son? Kids? And I said, how much is that Timex? That girl's watch right there. And he says, oh, you know, it's $8 with tax. It costs you $8.50. So, okay, hold that watch. Don't sell it to anybody. Now, of course, he's probably
How
laughing.
old were you? How old were you how old were you, Patrick?
I would have been about, my sister would have been about 8, so I would have been
Oh.
about 10 or 11.
Okay, great. Go ahead. Hold that watch.
Hold that watch, you know, and like I said, the guy was probably laughing a little bit because, you know, Timex watches, he had them. So me and Davey, we hustled and we just, you know, putting our money together, and we got all the way to Trumbull. That's where the railroad tracks were after Kedzie Avenue. And that was our last bar all the time. And we knew he closed at 5 o'clock. So we, you know, timed it, you know, to get to Trumbull by 3 and then have 2 hours to get back and, you know, get the money that, you know, make the money we needed. And we raced and we raced and we did what we could. And it got to be about 5 minutes to 5. And we were 10 or 15 minutes away. And I looked and I had like $7.29. And I said, Davey, we got to go and try to make a deal with this guy. I says, you know, we've got to hurry. So we ran like hell and went into the shop. The guy was waiting for us. We arrived like 1 minute after 5 or 2 minutes after 5. And I said, sir, I said, here's all the money we got. Me and Dave, we put all of our money on the table, on the counter, the glass counter, and he counted it out. He said, you're about $1.20 short. And I was destroyed, of course. And I said, sir, if you give me this watch, I promise you, tomorrow I'll get up after my sister's communion. I'll shoe shine on Monday morning. I'll have your $1.20. I promise you. And he looked at me, and I'll never forget. He says, kid, I don't work that way. And Davey reached and started to get the money. And I said, hold on a minute. He said, here's the watch. Took the watch out. Is this the one you want? I said, yeah. He said, I'm going to gift wrap it for you. He said, the $1.20 I'll put in for your sister's communion. It's my gift. And you just live, you know, eyeing up somebody's shoe to figure out how you're going to get it clean first, maybe. And a lot of times Central Steel was on 51st in California, between California and Kedzie. So a lot of the guys had, you know, dirty boots to clean and stuff like that. And, you know, you had to eye them up and you had to figure out what's the best way to get that stuff off of there. And what's the best way, you know, to make sure I can make it look, you know, proper. And he's got broken shoelaces. Did I bring shoelaces long enough? I can, you know, maybe get another quarter off them. And it's a wonderful thing. And Davey, today, I talked to him yesterday on the phone, actually, because I sent him the book. He said he was afraid to read it. And I said, well, don't, you know, Davey, don't be afraid. You know, you're really an inspiration to me. And he said he was going to read it today and tomorrow. But yeah, I mean, shoe shine buddies are, I don't know.
It's a great story.
I mean, I tell my
Great
sons,
story. Well,
I tell my sons, I said, when I die, you know, put on the, you know, the casket. He was a good shoe shine.
Well, it's a great story. I'm glad that you were able to lace that up at the end with that wonderful adage. But the passion to help someone, the commitment to helping someone, being willing to work hard to do that, and then somebody else recognizing what you've done and contributing as well. I mean, it's a wonderful story. If only the world could be more like that. You know, when we were talking before the show, you were wondering whether people would would be listening and reading New City. Tell me a bit about that.
Well, you're saying that, the world, it would be nice if we could start, caring about each other and helping each other out. And I really believe that we did a lot more than we do today. And, when I talk about the book, people, I'm probably a difficult guy to get to know, but in my lifetime, when I was 15 years old, I got fired from, I was working at an Italian restaurant as a busboy from the time I was about 12 to 15, and on 63rd in California, and I got fired. I got fired because I was playing dice with the two other busboys and the guy that delivered the fruit. And the boss's son, who didn't like me, not that I cared too much, he came out and we were in the back shooting the dice, and I was on my knees, and I went to grab one. I threw the dice, and then one went a little further, and I went to get the one that was closer. The one that was further was kind of still going. I knew it was a 3. They all knew I had a 3 here. Of course, I was hoping for a 4 on the other one, and I put my hand on the dice, and he stepped on it. I didn't see he was there, and I got fired. And one of the waitresses, her name was Elaine. She knew I was a hustler, and she knew how badly I needed the money, that my family needed the money. She got me a job at Northwestern Hospital on Chicago Avenue. And I'll never forget, I was 15. I was going there to be a dishwasher. And everyone that worked in the kitchen was black. Every one of them. And when I got there, I was like welcomed like a tax collector or something. They looked at me, and a lot of them weren't too happy to see me, or probably curious or wondering what I was doing. But I started working there, and there was a guy named Kevin, and Kevin was, I don't know, 2 or 3 years older than me, a tall, lanky guy, and he wasn't crazy about what I guess he considered himself a white person. I mean, I never, and when we were growing up, we never knew what white was. I mean, you were Irish or Polish, or you were, Mexican and Lithuanian. I mean, it was just, it's incredibly damaging what they've done to this country by turning people into Crayola colors. I mean, it's just idiotic. I mean, forgetting about what cultures that each one of our families is derived from, and just saying, now you're a Crayola color. I mean, me, because of our Italian ancestry, my nephew Anthony, I mean, he's dark. He look, people guess, what is he, Arab or whatever, or even my son Chicho. But, for them to tell you in your, face, and I've had this argument from time to time where I said, I'm not white, I'm Mediterranean. And, my people are from the Mediterranean. We're Mediterranean, or we're Latin, no, you're not, you're white. It's really crazy, and it doesn't make any sense. And it's a type of race baiting. It's a type of getting, people to hate each other for their either political gain or economic gain or whatever it is. But I get there, and this guy wanted to beat the shit out of me. So it started out that, hey, cracker, stop working so hard. You're making us look bad. And, I'm going to slap you if you, don't stop washing the dishes. And I'm like, hey, I need this job. I'm not going to stop washing dishes. I need this job. And he bullied me. And there was this big, heavy woman on the soup line. And you called it a soup line, but it was more than that, because they put Jello and they put corn on the cob, or not corn on the cob, but corn, and they put mashed potatoes and all of that. And all these women were all in white, and they had these big mesh over their head, and you could hardly tell what their faces even looked like, because they had mesh just over the eyebrows to everywhere, to keep the hair out of the food. And one time, Kevin Bryce caught me coming out of the locker room. I just changed, and he grabbed me and he put me in a headlock, and he punched me in the forehead, and getting ready to punch me again, when all of a sudden I felt like this vibration that went through his body into my body. It was kind of surreal. and it was Big Mama, one of the ladies from from the line. She hit him in the back with a soup ladle, and she said, "Kevin, I told you to leave that little skinny little white boy alone. He's half your size, and this and that." And oh my God. And she just walloped him and saved me. And it was tough for me because, you know, you got to go to work. It's 30 below zero sometimes. You know how Chicago is. And, you know, I'm running from school and trying to get there on time. And it was bad enough without having to worry about getting beat up every day. But Mama saved my life a couple of times. And then I went into the military, so I got in trouble. At 16, I went in front of Judge Clarence Bryant, and Judge Bryant was on 61st and Racine. The courtroom was above the police station. And I went in front of him 50 times, or it seemed like 50 times. And the last time, I believe it was, I was stealing a battery out of a police car on 35th and Low. And I got caught by this big Polish copper named Dombrowski, and he really disliked me. And I was a smart aleck, you know. I told him, "Yeah, you know, how are you going to make your 1.5 miles in 15 minutes?" You know, I was a wise ass. And he wanted me so bad to go to jail. And I was 16, and Clarence Bryant, I'll never forget it. I'm saying, you know, I'm really going to have to make up a good one this time. You know, because I never would go with my parents. I could never tell my mother and break her heart. And I didn't have a father to speak of. And I went there, "Young man, I'm tired of looking at you. When does he come back?" "November 8th, Your Honor." "Young man, on November 8th, you're going to bring me enlistment papers to the military branch of your desire, or you're going to jail." Well, back then, the only branch that would take me was the Air Force, because they had what was called the late enlistment program. And so I went, my mother signed the papers, and then they would take me when I was 17. They would tell you the month and all of that. And, you know, Clarence Bryant saved my life. Big Mama saved my life. For me, they were never black people. They were good people. And, you know, growing up as an Italian, you know, I started out as an Irishman, actually, because that was my last name. And I have my mother's maiden name now. But I mean, you know, we were people, and it didn't matter. You know, if your great grandparents came from Lithuania or Scotland, or if your parents came from Cuba or Uganda, you know, if you were a good person, you were a good person. And we didn't have the media, the presence of the media that we have today, that with TikTok and with Facebook and with all of the other venues just come in there and tell you, you know, what it is you should be thinking and doing. I mean, the country is a tyrannical place. One nice thing about going back home to Italy is that we don't have all of this nonsense. But the United States of America is being ripped apart by race baiters. And sometimes it's so hard to understand what they're gaining by trying to, you know, tell black people that white people are oppressive and that all of their problems is because they were slaves. I mean, this is the stupidest thing I've ever heard of. I mean, that young man, he could be a young black kid, 14 or 15. Do you think you're doing that kid any favor by trying to sow into him angry and hatred? I mean, I've never seen anything so absurd in my life. These people, you know, jail is too good for these people that are devising these things at these universities or wherever they're doing it at. And that's where the idea for New City came about. And I said, you know, I'm going to write about a story about people who love each other. And, you know, this whole idea of colorblind, you know, nobody's colorblind. You know, I love women. I'm not crazy about redheads. You know, we're all prejudiced about something. You know, some guys like girls with big breasts. Some girls like guys with nice teeth. in one way or another, we're all prejudice. We all have what we like. And what they're doing is trying to turn this into being a criminal, because maybe I love dating fat women and I don't like skinny women. So I'm a skinny shamer or I'm a fat shamer. And this whole idea of putting mannequins out there that are fat and overweight. I mean, I constantly wrestle with myself and other people, because I say, no, if you fat shame someone, you do it because you love them. Of course, you don't want to do it in the spirit of hurting them. But in the end, if you love someone, you smile at them. And I recently did it to one of my attorneys. I said, I love you. And I want you to be around a long time to work with my company and work with us. But it's not healthy to be overweight like that. You got to lose some weight. But instead, you've got Victoria's Secrets, Target, all of these places trying to make these people buy their clothes or whatever they're doing. I mean, you're pushing unhealthy mentality, unhealthy lifestyle. And what are you doing that for? For money? And then when I go and say, hey, Joey, how you doing? I seen you lost yourself 2 pounds. Keep it up. I like that. And they'll say, how did you're such you're fat shaming people, or you're hurting people. But so Black people, and then if we go on, I went into the military.
Hold on one sec. Let me stop there a sec, because you're talking a lot about something that I talk about a lot, which is that basically people have the opportunity to remind somebody else of their value, but we spend a lot of time devaluing each other and then are astonished the other person does the same back to us. And this is part of what is causing the division. This division that we create, that we, have a culture now where sometimes you're not allowed to say the old jokes that you used to say before because people get really offended quickly.
Tyrannical. And somebody wants to call the United States a free country. I tell them they're out of their mind. I mean, I realize that people would like, to defend their country because they love it. And of course, I love my country. But because I love my country, I believe that I have to say it is not a free country. It's a tyrannical country.
Well, there is something about the awareness, because I think that's part of what people are teaching me, is that some of the things that I may have been saying for years innocently, without any malice, can now be interpreted as not so innocent and a bit more malicious. The question I have is that's somebody else's interpretation. My intent, however, is never to devalue someone.
Judge me by my intent. And that was one of the great words. And I know that this is not popular any longer either, but Robert E. Lee is my favorite American. My favorite American. And if anyone has ever read about him, I've read 5 or 6 books about him. After the Civil War, that war could have went on and on as guerrilla warfare, etc. And he said, no, that's it. And then he went on to be the president of the Washington Lee University in St. Louis. But what a gentleman. He did more than any person in our country, North or South, after the Great Division, to put things back together. And he's a wonderful man, and he was a gentleman. And, people, they don't want to talk about it, but the fact of the matter is that Lee was asked to lead the Northern Army. And he said, where goes Virginia is where I go. So if Virginia had decided to go with the North, then Lee would have been the head of commanded the Northern armies. Virginia went to South and Lee commanded the Southern armies. Had nothing to do with slavery for Lee. Like I said, I've read 5 or 6 books extensively on it, but what a man. But our country today, where you're taking down, Christopher Columbus statues, they took down 2 of them in Chicago. And I mean, it's just, it's literally, it's a tyranny. And the people can say that they're doing it in the best interest of fat people, ugly people, homosexual people, white people, brown people, people that think they're another sex or in the wrong body, they can say whatever they want. But what they're doing is tyrannical, and it's destroying the nation. And that was one of the reasons why I wrote New City and sewed these things together. And I want to loop back into that. When I was in the military, I was in basic training at Lowry Air Force, or not Lowry, at the Air Force Base in, San Antonio Air Force Base. And that's where basic training was. And I was a wise guy. I was a punk. The Gresham was my drilling sergeant, and they tried to, intimidate you and bully you. And, I'd look at him, I'd smirk, and he'd push me and shove me and kick me or whatever. But, I'd get up and, I knew what's he going to do? He ain't going to kill me. He can't kill me, so he gives me a slap. So what? How many times I was slapped? I didn't care. And I didn't like him, and he didn't like me. And he tried to get me thrown out. And again, I was saved by Staff Sergeant Smith. So they were going to give me an undesirable discharge. I was 17 years old. I would have been back home to Chicago. I wouldn't have probably had a lot of choice. I'd been robbing cars again or doing, I drove a truck after, but I was mischievous, let's put it that way. And I go in front of the Staff Sergeant Smith, with Master Sergeant or Staff Sergeant Gresham, and Smith was a Master Sergeant, tough little guy. I say little guy because he wasn't much taller than me. And Gresham was just giving him 5,000 reasons why I was undesirable and why I had to be put out. And he listened to Gresham, and he looked at me, and he said, "Boy, you're going to get one last chance. And if you let me down, you're going to be out of here." And he saved my life again. Another black guy. So first I'm saved by Clarence Bryant, who sends me to military, then first Big Mama, then Clarence Bryant, and then Master Sergeant Smith.
So in other words, I agree. It's not about race.
It ain't about race. It had nothing to do. Sergeant Smith could have been green or red or whatever. But I happen to know firsthand that we're all brothers and sisters. I'm a Catholic, and I've got many patients who are Muslims, because our biggest, and Hindus, our biggest, population for thalassemia is actually in India. And I've been there many times.
Patrick, I don't think people know that part.
I'm
the
sorry.
Story, right? Unless they listen to the other episode.
I'm sorry. I apologize.
No, that's good. Why don't we just make a slight deviation from that and tell them why thalassemia is so important to you, and then we can move on with that.
All right. So, all right, we're going to have to get back into the loop, but
we will. I will bring us back. Believe me, I'm good at that.
All right. So anyway, I end up getting an honorable discharge from the military. My mother had a lot of trouble at home, and she wrote to the Red Cross, and I ended up getting out, and I thank God, an honorable discharge. And I ended up driving a truck for a while and loading docks, but by luck, I ended up at the Board of Trade and Chicago Board Option Exchange in Chicago. I was on Oprah Winfrey's show twice. The first time, Rags to Riches story. I was in Playgirl magazine as one of America's most eligible bachelors. There were, 15, 20 articles written about me and about my fortunes and my personality. I was the youngest ever to run for a countywide office in Cook County, which is where city of Chicago's in. And I finally got married and had my son, Rocco. Now, my grandfather, with my mother, helped raise me. And I have my mother's maiden name. And it was so important for me to call, to name my son Rocco. And I had traveled back to Italy to visit my grandparents' family and roots. And there was a big FBI sting going on at the Board of Trade, and I disappeared for 2 years. And Rocco was born in Italy. He was diagnosed in 1992, October, with the Mediterranean anemia. So that the love that I had for my grandfather, and being of Italian descent on the Mediterranean, brought my son a sickness. And me and my wife were both carriers of the Mediterranean anemia, which is also called Cooley's anemia or thalassemia. And my son had the disease, and it was 1992 October. And for him to live, he needed to transfuse blood because he had a hemoglobin, which is the oxygen carrier in our body, of about 7.
And it's meant to be.
And it was meant to be. And I, at that time, didn't want to transfuse him for any reason, because hepatitis C and AIDS virus were rampant in the blood. They hadn't discovered the antibodies yet. So I took him and flew to San Francisco to spend time with a very courageous Korean doctor. And for me, again, it drives me nuts, these calling people Crayola colors. I mean, so anyway, what was my Korean doctor? Was she yellow? I mean, it's just, does she have to write yellow on her? I mean, it's just nuts. So, but her father was American, and he worked for in Saudi Arabia for Aramco. Her mother was a Korean nurse, and she was very Korean looking, very exotic looking. Her name is Susan Perrine, and she had an experimental medicine that my son could take that would stimulate his hemoglobin to rise. And we did that. And for about 40 days in the hospital, it was about $70,000, and he had to live in the hospital. Well, we couldn't do that very long. So I opened up a medical center in Italy, and I flew Dr. Perrine back and forth. And we actually had my son on arginine butyrate. His hemoglobin went up to about 9.5, 10. He was able to live normally, except that he was hooked up to this pump for about 16 hours a day, stimulating his hemoglobin. We ended up having 38 patients, did clinical trials in Italy with the University of Milan, University of Bari, Taranto Sick Children's, and Boston University, because the Dr. Susan Perrine went from San Francisco then to Boston, BU, and my son avoided, blood transfusions all the way until, I'm going to say, 98, 99. And if he would have started and done that, 5-6 years of blood transfusions, he got away with doing over 100 blood transfusions at a time where you really didn't want to do them, and with all of the damage that comes with the blood transfusions. So I started in 93 the drug company that's today called San Rocco Therapeutics. In 95, I was joined by John Walton of Walmart. John's son had Wilms tumor, his only child, and there was an application of arginine butyrate for Wilms tumor. John put in 20 million, and we were partners from 95 to 2004. In 2000, I read the Nature magazine article about gene therapy saving 6 generations of thalassemic mice. I found the researcher, wonderful man, Michel Sedelin. He was working at Memorial Sloan Kettering. And I ended up licensing his technology. John Walton, in 2004, his son was doing fine. He didn't need to worry any longer about arginine butyrate saving his son if he relapsed. He just handed the whole company to me. I'll never forget. I was on the trading floor. Pat, what? John Walton's on the phone. All right, hold on. Johnny, what's going on? Oh, yeah. Lucas is doing good. I want you to just save Rocco. I'm going to give you everything. And back then it was called Beacon Pharmaceutical. I'm going to just give you Beacon. Johnny, thanks.
Well,
I mean, these are true stories.
Right. But Patrick, I'm not sure which one has more meaning to you, the company or the Timex. You know, because they're both great stories that are recognizing part of you, that you, person who wants to give back to the world. So, Patrick, these are wonderful stories about people giving, recognizing something in you.
Well, thank you very much. I don't want to say I appreciate the compliments, because it's hard for me to take compliments, because I believe that I'm not that bright, and I just do what a good Catholic should do. And I really believe that there are millions of parents out there that would have done a better job than I was able to do. But I do appreciate what you're saying. And I do think that stories like the ones I'm telling you today, which are all true, and I could go on and on and on and on about people who, love others and help me out. My first book was called Flight of the Rondone, and I don't remember if you remember why I called it that, but the Rondone is a bird that flies from Northern Africa, or actually Southern Africa, and lays eggs in Altamura, and it's around for 3 or 4 months. And it flies up to 140 miles an hour. And when it collides against something and falls to the ground, it can't raise itself up because its wings are too long. And so it's always got to land on high so it can throw itself into the wind. And so when we find one of these birds on the ground, we have to pick them up and throw them into the air. And that's where I got the name of the book, Flight of the Rondone, because so many times in my life, whether it was the Walton family, whether it was Master Sergeant Smith, whether it was Big Mama, whether it was Clarence Bryant, Judge Bryant, and pick me up and, threw me high enough so I could start, flying again. So, but thanks for the compliment and all that. But again,
I can take it back if it bothers you, Patrick. I mean,
take it back.
I mean,
Yeah.
But the message that you're trying to get across in New City, is it? I mean, the idea of race baiting. Can you just talk a little bit more about that before we get to the two questions?
When we were growing up, the race baiters were a lot of it was white on black. I mean, of course, I remember the race baiters could be on Irish and Italian. The Dagos got big noses. They all, eat garlic. So I mean, there was more names for the Italians than anyone. It was Dago, Guinea, Wop, greaseball, garlic eater, spaghetti bender. I mean, it goes on and on and on. And, people would, try to get you not date an Irish girl because you were Italian or whatever it was. And that, in a certain sense, that was race baiting. Or they would get you not to sit next to the black kid at school because blacks smell, and, all of this race baiting.
Yeah, absolutely.
And today we have race baiting, but in the opposite way. So today, everybody's telling, white people are privileged, white people had slaves, white people are this, white people are that. It's insanity. You got colleges talking about taking away points from Asian students because they work too hard and their scores. I mean, it's insanity. And this whole idea of identifying Americans. I mean, we're all Americans. Case closed. But identifying Americans as Crayola colors is like,
right.
I mean, it's crazy.
I'd say it goes even beyond being all Americans. I mean, we're all one species. It's called humanity. We're one group. It's called humanity. That's part of what we're trying to get across with the Dr. Joe Show is let's look at who we are and why we do what we do, but without that judgment, with that respect. I mean, what is going on that the best a person can do is the race baiting? What's happening in their life that the only way that they can feel valuable is to put somebody else down? And we have this not just at an individual level, but as you say, at a cultural level. But we don't need to do that, but we still do. So it's a really important subject. Tom, do you want to chime in on anything? You've been listening.
I mean, it's a very understandable reaction to the big sea change is that like the idea that white people are under attack or that I should be guilty because I'm white. I don't have a guilty bone in my body. I can still recognize that there are, injustices that, there's not a brick wall between yesterday and today where we can just brush it under the rug, say, we address it and let's move on. Like there are things like crack, how crack form carried a average 50 times worse sentence than powder cocaine. And if you look how that wound up, that meant more black people going to prison. Still does. I can address that without saying that I'm guilty of anything. Like slavery, mostly white people owned slavery. There were American Indians owned slaves, there were black people owned slaves. It was mostly white people. I'm not guilty of that. I didn't do that.
Right.
I can address that the legacy of slavery has carried over to today because slavery is not entirely abolished in the 13th Amendment. After the abolition of slavery, quote unquote, complete abolition, we had convict leasing. In some ways we still do, but the idea that we had vagrancy laws where if a black person was just found on the street, if they couldn't prove that they had a job, they went to prison. I never learned about that.
Right. But
and I don't think you probably never did it either, though.
I never did it, and I'm not guilty about it. And I don't think that many people are trying to make me feel guilty. The idea that it's an attack on me, it's inaccurate, I would say. I'm sure that there are definitely people who are going to say that I'm bad because I'm white. They're fewer and far between than you think.
So it's Patrick.
Yeah. So, where did we leave off? We talked about the flight of the Rondoni.
We were talking about how people who are not of your particular look, like what you look like, still helps you. And how I think New City is also an opportunity to help a lot of people, no matter what color of crayon they may be.
Yeah, I mean, New City, so it's hilarious. But New City, you have, I don't know how many homes are left in New City. Let's say it's 5,000 homes. But you have homes that are literally worth $10,000 and they owe $200,000 in property tax and fines for grass cutting, garbage on the property, no fence, no sign on the property, etc. And it's hilarious. And people say, well, that's impossible. But I can tell you that's not impossible. The city of Chicago, the Loop is a very pristine center. And you don't need to meet 5 miles from the Loop. You have property that is worth negative money. You can't pay somebody to take that property because they know it, that if they take the property, not only do they have to pay taxes, but the city goes around, the internal revenue agents go around in the morning. And if there's a bottle on the property, they take a picture, $600 fine. Some of the fines are $1,000. Grass cutting, I think, is $1,000. And these people, they can get in a year, $20,000 in fines, and they can't pay them. And these fines, when Rahm was elected the mayor in, I'm going to say 2010 or 12, I don't remember exactly. Grass cutting was $50. Garbage on your property was $50. Those were the fines. And all of a sudden they went to $600. And I remember I wrote something somewhere. I said, if they really wanted to, erase the deficit from the city, why didn't they just make them $6 million? Because those people can afford $600 as much as they could afford $6 million. I mean, they don't have money to buy their medicine. And you're going to ask them for $600 because you believe that their grass was too tall, for example. So that's what's going on in New City even today. And then because it's so close to the Loop, the developers want the property so that they can regentrify it. And it's kind of this crazy thing. But now because of all of the violence going on in places like New York and Chicago, the regentrification has slowed down because people don't have the courage to do it any longer because they're afraid to go out of their homes. You got Chicago, I think 800 murders a year. I mean, Chicago's about 800,000 people less than the city of Rome. Rome has about 50 murders a year. Chicago's got 800, and Chicago's not even in the top 25 in the United States for violence, by the way. You got cities like East St. Louis and St. Louis and Detroit and Memphis and Nashville. I mean, it's just, incredible. So the regentrification in Chicago has come to a skidding halt, and you've got these poor people. They live in a building that they couldn't sell for $5,000, and they owe, property tax. And some of these, you have a house that's worth $5,000. Guess what the property tax is? Some of them $5,000. It's insanity, but that's what's going on in New City. And in the book, Davey and his next door neighbor, this is where I go off from reality and I kind of make the story up a little bit, decide they want to move to Greencastle, Indiana, where Davey's father, his friend, who's 94 years old and wants to go to California and live with his nephew, is going to sell Davey a spread, a couple acres with a pond and a little house on it for $10,000, because Davey's his best buddy's friend. And Davey and the next door neighbor, Napoleon, with his 5 kids, dream of getting $10,000 plus $3,000 for moving and everything. And they're going to save that money, and then they're going to abandon their homes and let the gentrification come in or do whatever is going to happen. And they're going to go and live in Greencastle, Indiana. And that becomes the kind of the dream of the book.
So that's the hope.
That's the hope.
hope.
That's the hope. And, the hope is too, I mean, I've seen it happen. Guys die and people don't have money for funerals. So you got to kind of go to the back door to funeral home and, kind of make a deal with them, and the bodies are stiff and you don't have the money and you can't figure out how you're going to do with the police. And if you involve the police and, all this kind of crazy stuff that goes on for people that live in poverty and don't really have the means to live in a way that Oprah Winfrey lives, or, or Magic Johnson could live, or who I know, by the way, because he was in Playgirl with me, or, Michael Jordan can live, so they don't have this, that luxury.
Yeah.
And
so many of us.
Yeah, they're right. And it's just crazy.
So let me ask, because we're coming to the end of the show, and what we talk about here is the I am approach, that we're all doing the best we can. Influenced by
but we're not all doing the best we can. That's one of the problems.
But you see that, but you and I can have another show about that, because we can absolutely talk about even that is an I am, right? But we're influenced by the home, the social domain, the biological, and the IC. So because these 4 domains interact, a small change can have a big effect. Patrick, given the topic we're talking about tonight, what small change can you recommend to our listening audience?
As I said, because of my pharmaceutical company, I've been to India many times, and I have patients of every creed, religion, nationality that you can imagine. And I'm Catholic. And when I talk to them, whether they're Hindu or Buddhist or Muslim, whatever it is, I tell them, for me, I'm just lucky because I'm a Catholic. And I'm not going to argue about Jesus being God or not being God and all that, but this is the way I live my life. And Jesus could have gotten away from dying on the cross, kind of like Socrates. Socrates, he could have told the Greeks, all right, I'll stop messing with you, I'm gonna stop busting your balls, or I don't want to drink the hemlock. But instead he said, hey, I'll drink the hemlock. And Jesus did the same thing. Jesus could have told the rabbis and everything, yeah, don't worry about it, the poor people, screw them all, and whatever, I'll give in to you guys. And they wouldn't put him on the cross anymore if he would have apologized, kind of what they did to the people for January 6th, it looks like. But Jesus didn't, because he loved his principles. And that means that he loved humanity. And that means that he loved humanity, and we are humanity, that he loved us more than he loved himself.
And so the small change would be what?
Excuse me?
Love others. The small change for our audience, based on that story, is love.
Yeah, well, okay, but I'm sorry, and I don't want to go over or whatever, but and he also said, he without sin throw the first stone.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, we are all brothers and sisters.
Mm-hmm.
And we are. And so the small change, all you got to do is care about the next guy. Like, what's the old song? Take a walk in a mile in my shoes, or and that's it.
Yeah. So that's a good small change, to remind each other of their value. not a bad thing. The second truth of the I am is everybody's interested in what you think or feel about them. You're part of someone's home or social domain, and you know it has an effect on their biological domain. It feels different when you feel respected or disrespected. So because of this, we control no one, but we influence everyone. You control no one, you influence everyone. You get to choose the kind of influence you want to be. Patrick Girondi, author of New City and many other books. Singer, writer, creator, helper. What kind of influence do you want to be?
Just that I was a nice shoe shine that tried to do what he could to help other people. And, you know, that's all it takes. That if we all just try to get up in the morning and do something nice for, you know, the next door neighbor or kids or whatever it is, that's it.
Yeah, it's a great metaphor. It's okay to bend over and help shine someone's shoes so that they have a better day.
Yeah, I mean, I don't even care if people respect me. I don't give a shit about it. You know, people always tell me, oh, you got to be respected. I don't care. I don't care if you respect me or you don't respect me. That doesn't change my life if you respect me or you don't respect me. Doesn't mean that I'm not going to get up and do what I have to do every day. I mean, for me anyway.
And that's exactly part of the I am. It's being able to recognize that we're always at our I am, our current maximum potential. Good night, everyone.